A good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to round 8 of the AROC Racing League's Touring Car Championship for 2025. One of our final rounds of 2025, of course, as well. It is great to be back here at Snetterton this evening with you folks. Just over 3 minutes to go in qualifying. Apologies for the slightly later start to this one this evening, but we are underway nonetheless. We're on board at the moment with Andrew Whitehead, who I believe is what the Autocam has decided we will be on board with for quite some time in this session. Oh, that's why. Oh no, the Autocam wasn't able to. I wasn't going mad. Either way, we go on board with Matt Daly, who's having a bit of a skirmish off track at the moment, but otherwise is currently controlling the pace in this session. 153.830 sees Matt Daly taking charge with provisional pole at the moment. That's a pretty comfortable provisional pole as well, it must be said. You have to head down to the 154.4s to see the next place driver of Andrew Whitehead, 154.457, and he's pretty close quarters actually with Andy Webb. This is looking like a really good showing for Andy Webb so far in this one. I did see glimpses of Webb in the practice servers earlier on, getting plenty of experience, as was Miles Davis as well, so could bode well. Of course, Andy enjoying his time out in race 2 last week, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed their time out in the GCA 1750s last week. It was a tremendous evening's worth of racing, so I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do in the touring cars this evening, especially given that we've got a little bit more experience in the car and track combo for those who might not necessarily have driven it under full race conditions before. We should head into this one with a bit more experience under our belts and should be on for a fantastic evening's worth of racing, as I say. Heading into the final third of this championship now. We discussed that in the GTA 1750s here last week and what that means for how the championship is shaping up. We'll delve into that a little bit further as we head into the racing action. But now's a point where the fight really must be brought to those front runners if you want any hope of trying to take the top step in this championship. Only after this one is completed 4 rounds to go in the running, so really not long to go now, as I say, in our standings. 1 minute 23 seconds on the clock, which means not long to go in this qualifying session either. We're going to go on board with the driver who will be crossing the line to complete or at least start the next lap, a fairly long lap here at Snetterton, which means that this is going to be the final attempt for Andrew Whitehead. We'll stay on board with him as he tries to improve upon his previous attempt and close up to Matt Daly, as he has done in the championship standings here. Again, more on that later on, but let's head through Montreal now. The run down towards Palmer. Montreal won the prime overtaking opportunities at this otherwise very narrow and quite complex circuit. We did see a few brave lunges down through Brundle and into Nelson as well. Murray's another opportunity if your defending rival has perhaps had a slightly iffy line. Murray's can present itself a fantastic opportunity to at least set up a move into turn 1 and turn 2 of Montreal, if not get it done before you start that next lap. 25 seconds left on the clock. Whitehead heads around Hamilton and towards Williams in just a moment. No cars occupying the same area as Andrew Whitehead at the moment, which is ideal if you are Andrew Whitehead, but what is not ideal is that predicted lap time, which has just glitched out, so ignore that, folks. I can promise you he's not trying to do a 1 hour lap time, but it was looking like a 1 hour 55, which is less than ideal, so he should be continuing on quite nicely. Checkered flag wave then for Paul Millman, Steve Knight and Reeve Taylor as well, funnily enough, as we see Whitehead heading through Brundle here. The curbs so easy to get ever so slightly wrong, can potentially upset the balance of the car, upset your lines as well, but no major ill effects for Whitehead this time out. Our predicted lap time has gone out the window, so apologies for that one, folks. Sector 1 wasn't looking like an improvement. What Sector 2 going to shape up to be, we'll find out in just a couple of seconds. Now as he runs through Murray's, and then it's just the wait down to the start-finish straight. No improvement through Sector 2 as well. It's not looking like it's going to be the lap to remember for Andrew Whitehead as he comes across the line to 1 minute 54.4 to beat, and that was a 1 minute 55.1. Whitehead, checkered flag waved. That's all Andrew can do in this session. Now Matt Daly's looking ever so more comfortable now. Has already got provisional pole. It's looking like he's going to have pole in this one, but let's just see what he can do anyway. Doesn't improve through that first sector, but is on for a bit of a flyer. His best lap, pretty much his previous lap as well. Gets slightly squiffy through that final corner of Murray's there. Does claw back some grip though, heads onto that start-finish straight, a 153.862 to beat, or 8.3 to beat. and he does not manage it, but gets oh so close, does Matt Daly, as he comes across the line there. Miles Davis, next driver to cross the line, improves nicely there, a 155.430. That is a best overall, but no change of positions for Davis. Then the final driver out on track is going to be Alan Matthews, 155.346 to beat. As he crosses the line, it's a 154.946. Again, no change in position there for Alan Matthews, but does close up towards Andy Webb. That is a nice run for Alan Matthews. That's one of those qualifying sessions where I think, you know what, give it 5 more minutes, 2 more, maybe 1 or 2 more attempted laps for each driver. We could have been on for a real fight in at least the upper midfield there. Alas, that wasn't the case, and Matt Daly's earlier efforts, a very impressive 153.830. See Matt Daly take pole in this qualifying session, which means in a few minutes, we're going to see him on that front row of the grid as we get ready for race 1. Well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, on the grid, ready for race one this evening. It's a quick run through the order, just over 30 seconds to go until the light out. It's Matt Daly and Whitehead on row one, followed by Andy Webb and Alan Matthews completing that second row. Then we have Miles Davis and Paul Millman completing the third row. Then Steve Knight completes the field on the fourth row of the grid. We had plenty of fun in the GTA 1750s last week. Let's see what some slightly more capable racing machinery makes of this, and in some parts, very high-speed circuit. I imagine the run through Coram could get very interesting indeed for these front-wheel drive cars carrying all that speed as they can do with the amount of air they've got, but all the work to do on that front axle could be very interesting in terms of tyre temp. Let's see how these cars hold up. The revs begin to rise, though. We have 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away for race one here this evening. It's a lot of wheel spin for Matt Daly, but he seems to eke out ahead of not Alan Matthews, apologies. Seems to eke out ahead of Andrew Whitehead. Whitehead has the inside, though, as we head into the first corner of Riches. Can he cling it to that inside and get a good rocket down towards Montreal in just a moment? Well, he's going to have the inside for Montreal if he can hang it there. And P2, what a position to start from here at Snetterton, because it's worked very well indeed for Andrew Whitehead, able to box off Matt Daly by just hanging it on the inside. They're getting a great run into that first corner and eventually takes the race lead. We're going to have a real fight on our hands. It looks like a pretty big gap between the two drivers in qualifying. It's looking ever so close, though, in this race. Watch out for Alan Matthews as well, who's now putting pressure on our pole sitter, Matt Daly, as we head through towards Agostini in just a moment. In fact, we are going through Agostini now. Our top 3 covered by less than 1 second. Very close running indeed, and all of a sudden Daly's dropping off the back of Andrew Whitehead, and in fact is now falling into the jaws of Alan Matthews. Let's not forget as well, Andy Webb and Miles Davis very much in the mix in this one. We've got a smaller grid than last week, but that just means that when we do have some action, it pretty much involves the entire grid. And look at this as well. We see all of our cars filtering on through. Jack Hodson did jump into the session pretty late on. He's not a lap down, and he's on the medium tyres. A nice safe bet. So he could not be out of this one in terms of coming last. I can't imagine he's going to be able to do particularly well in terms of fighting for those podiums, but there could be a couple of points on the board for Jack Hodson, or at least there should be, because he's in 8th position anyway. Either way, Whitehead controlling this very nicely. A dream race start, it must be said. He can't ask for better than that, as Daly continues on in P2. And as I say, who would have thought, with such an impressive qualifying turn of pace, it looked like it was Daly's for the taking, but now Daly's going to have all the work to do as we head on to the start-finish straight. Alan Matthews is just behind, has dropped back ever so slightly low, hasn't taken any purple sectors. Of course, Whitehead takes that first purple sector. It was the race start, and he overtook. Perhaps no surprise there, but Daly clearly on a bit of a charge back, on a bit of an attack drive towards Andrew Whitehead. Goes purple through the second and third sectors, albeit the third sector really just an extension of that second sector, aka it's only 9 seconds. If you have a good second sector, that means that you've nailed that final corner, which means you'll have a good third sector, because it's basically just a dash out the final corner to the start finish straight. As that's a weird graphical glitch in front of your screens, folks. I can confirm that we aren't having some weird type of twister or firework going off on your screens. Not sure what's going on there, but Daly is certainly catching up to Andrew Whitehead. Now we head through Agostini and into Hamilton in just a moment. Daly goes over the curbs using as much of this narrow track as he dares in an effort to close up. That gap stands at 9/10 of a second, and we head around the next couple of right-handers. Into Williams we go, and it's pedal to the metal, as it probably has been since before the entry of Williams, to be honest. Pedal to the metal to get these cars back up to the highest speed on this circuit, before we run down through Brundle and Nelson once more. Obviously, plenty of Formula 1 adjacent names here on this circuit. I think Murray's, Brundle, Nelson, Williams, Montreal, Hamilton, just to name a few, and then a few of the racing adjacent ones as well, of course. Fabulous corner names here at Snetterton, as I say, and a fabulous race circuit as well. Daly, though, absolutely on a charge as he matches the hot air balloon in the background there, closing up through that first sector, but Whitehead responding quite nicely through the mid-phase of the previous lap and turning around with his own purple sector, but losing out by a couple of tenths compared to Daly's straight line performance heading down the start-finish straight. This could be big in terms of how they set up their battling. if Whitehead knows that he's confident in those corners, he can fend off Daly, providing he doesn't compromise himself too much. What Daly will be hoping for is that Whitehead preoccupies himself too much with defending and all of a sudden leaves an opportunity to benefit from that slight straight line speed advantage and swoop on by down the straights. Plenty to play for these two drivers. Having a look elsewhere in the pack though, we see a little bit of a battle brewing up between Paul Milman and Steve Knight. Knight in 7th, but just loses the back end there, heading through Palmer. Not one that we typically see out of these cars. They're not understeery messes by any means. They haven't got a Busso V6 up front, so I'll leave that comment there and not say much else. But certainly don't expect to see them with the back end kicking out. I think the balance shifted a little bit in that car. Potentially a dab of brakes maybe upsetting the balance there, as I've alluded to on many an occasion. Mito Quadrifoglio owners will be very familiar with that feeling. It's all right. You can berate them when you're registrar. Anyway, it's the perk of the job. What can I say? It's the only reason. It's the only reason I put my name forward. Anyway, 20 minutes left on the timer. Let's certainly move on. Whitehead continues on 1.2 seconds ahead of Daly. Daly ahead of Matthews by a fairly comfortable margin now. Matthews having a bit of an off as he runs through Nelson and down towards Coram in just a moment. Any more mistakes like that, he will be costing himself some time and might be leaving himself vulnerable, as I do some track graphic feng shui, to Miles Davis, who's running in P4 and running quite nicely. Now, Miles Davis had a really strong showing in race 2, had a really strong showing for 90% of race 1 as well. Unfortunately, it went a little bit wrong in race 1 towards the end. And Davis, I'm sure, hoping to make amends for that this evening. A bit more experience under his belt at this track. Maybe not in this car, but then again, I don't know exactly what his practice regime has been looking like, although I did see him, as I mentioned earlier on, getting plenty of practice in earlier on in the evening. Now, this is a familiar sight, folks, isn't it? If you tuned into the GTA 1750 action last week, you will have seen Miles Davis and Andy Webb having a bit of a squabble out on track as they run through Palmer. Less than a car length separates these two drivers. You have to say Webb's looking just a little bit more comfortable out on track at the moment. In terms of the pace overall, that does confirm that Webb a 54.9 on the best lap and the previous lap. Miles Davis in the 56s on that last lap, so has lost all that time that he had over Webb from qualifying, all within that past lap pretty much, and Miles Davis's best is still only a 155.7, so Andy Webb is very much on the attack here, and it's going to be Miles Davis in the vulnerable position. Let's see how this shapes up. As I mentioned, these two drivers having a thoroughly enjoyable battle throughout various points of the previous week's running. Let's see how they make of our Juliettas out on track this time around. Back into Montreal we go. We see Davis still controlling things, but potentially leaving a gap there for Andy Webb. Andy Webb certainly sniffing one out as we run through the tight right-hander. Noticing more and more AROC Racing League's graphics on these circuits as we navigate them. Just seen a few on some barriers there. That's a fun game to play, folks. Spot the AROC Racing League's branding. Well, there's an AROC badge on your screens on the back of the braking boards. Let's see what else we can find throughout the proceedings of the evening. Hello to all of you watching along at home this evening. Thank you very much for tuning in. As I always mention, if you do have any comments, questions or queries, make sure to get those in to the comment section. I am actively monitoring the comment section on this broadcast, so as I say, do make sure to stay tuned with those. Any input, feedback or suggestions, by all means, more than welcome. If you want to get involved, I've mentioned it on a couple of occasions. It's in the AROC Alfa Romeo Driver magazine usually, but feel free to search up for our Facebook group, drop a comment here even, or find us through the AROC website as well. Plenty of ways to get involved. As I mentioned, 15 minutes on the clock now, and Andy Webb finding his way past Miles Davis. That's a big one. Miles Davis just pushing on ever so slightly too much and finding himself in the grass on the run through Brundle and Nelson. That can be done a couple of ways, but primarily it's just carrying too much speed through Brundle, going too late on the brakes into Nelson, or rather as you escape Brundle into Nelson, just not having enough D-rating going on in the car, and the front end just can only do so much. You're carrying plenty of speed before you head into one of the slowest parts of the entire circuit, so it's certainly a tricky one to negotiate. These drivers doing a far better job of it than perhaps I could. But Davis drops down to 5th, Webb in 4th. We head back up to the top end action now, where we see Andrew Whitehead still leading the charge in this race, but purple sectors being traded between himself and Matt Daly. Matt Daly stands at now only 6/10 of a second, separating him and Whitehead as we head down towards Agostini in just a moment. And slowly but surely, Daly is chipping away at that lap time, and I get the feeling that at this phase, Daly's confident, Daly's comfortable, Daly's looking composed. Whitehead might just be starting to show signs of ever so slight errors here or there. Now Daly's, I say he's looking comfortable, calm and composed, etc. We're seeing him bounding over curbs, in the grass, locking up earlier than everyone else, but he's just wringing that car out for everything it's got, I think, at this point. He is driving that thing absolutely on the ragged edge. He's closing up to Daly, to Whitehead, ever so slightly, is actually benefiting from a little bit of a toe. Found a few hundredths of a second there, and found some more as we head into Brundle. Found a 10th there, really nailing that tricky run in to the quick left-right towards the end of the straight. Yes, Daly really closing up now on that last lap of 54.0, and for Whitehead it was a 54.2, and the best laps overall share a similar story. Best lap of 54.2 for Whitehead, a 54.0 for Daly as he head through Murray's and back onto that start-finish straight. The gap previously at half a second now stands at only 1.5 tenths as we head on to the start-finish straight. As I mentioned earlier, it very well could just be a case of Daly has to pick his moments, has to wait for a slight compromised exit from Whitehead to benefit from that huge straight line speed he seems to be demonstrating in his yellow Giulietta this evening as he hangs it round the outside, goes side by side, late on the brace. Can he make it into Montreal? I don't think he can, but might get a switchback on exit here. He's going to have a look at the outside, but it's well defended by Andrew Whitehead, I must say. The gap still stands at 1.5 seconds. This circuit is narrow. Oh dear, the back end kicks out for Whitehead. That could cost him some time. It looks like he's recovered it and will be able to push on, but that gap now stands at 2/10 of a second. Daly can't find a way past yet. And as I was going to say, this narrow circuit could just be playing into Whitehead's hands for the time being. It's one of those tracks, a bit like Portimao, where it can, in some places, kind of flow, and the lefts and the rights just mean that the track can kind of do the work for you in some regards and do the defending for you. We have a few tracks like this on the calendar this year. Maybe Snetterton not the best example of that, to be fair, but certainly looks like Whitehead is putting some good effort into this defence. The question is, has there been enough effort? Because we now go side by side on the exit of Williams, 2/10, 200ths in fact. We are level, we are ahead if you are Matt Daly. Can he hang around the outside into Brundle? Yes, he can. Remarkable stuff. That gives him the inside into Nelson as well. That might have compromised his run though, because Whitehead looked pretty handy heading through Nelson, but for the time being, after a good few laps of effort, Matt Daly, the car in yellow, takes the race lead. And if you tuned out just before the start of lap 1 after qualifying and you've just tuned back in, you'd be thinking, oh, this is exactly as I expected, but it has been anything but so far in this race. Daly's had to work for this one, and I don't think that work is quite over yet, because Whitehead closes up on the exit of Murray's. Less than half race distance to go already, folks. And as I say, Whitehead's on a bit of a charge now. We know he's certainly got some really strong pace. He started this race very well. Bit of a surprise, really, given just how good Daly was in qualifying. And now he's on a bit of a charge back. I think these drivers are reveling in this battle. I know I certainly am, and I hope you are as well, folks. This is going to be a good one, if it hasn't been already, as we see Whitehead goes a little bit too wide at Montreal, touches the grass, and that gives him just a bit more breathing space to Matt Daly. Here we are now seeing Daly controlling things quite nicely in this race. The gap standing at around about 1 second now. They were very close for a number of laps, but at this point, they seem to be pretty comfortable in their running. As Daly slightly expanding that lead. Now, I want to see what his pace is looking like overall. Usually at this phase, at least back in the single-seater era, we would see a bit of a resurgence in pace. We might see that in just a moment. The fuel tank gets lighter, and the fuel tank will need to be pretty full here at Snetterton because there's plenty of full throttle action. But also the tyres will be experiencing some drop-off. Everyone on the softs now. Hodson started off in the mediums, has dipped into the pits for some softs, I imagine, forgoing that point that he might have had against the likes of Steve Knight, and instead opting to get on the softs, treat this as a practice run for race 2, which is a very good strategy, I think, because that could pay dividends later on into race 2, as he will, of course, have the, well, he would have had the possibility to start from a reverse grid pole. So actually, he might have missed out on a bit of a trick there if you are Jack Hodson, because could have been race 2 pole potentially on the cards. As a reminder, our top 7 are reversed for our reverse grid action later on, but I'm sure that practice will still be very useful indeed before we head into that reverse grid race later on. Now, Daly pushing that car, giving it all that it's got, and just clipping the sausage curb on the inside of Murray's, right on the apex there, and up onto 2 wheels. It's not too uncommon. I mean, I say not too, it's not at all uncommon to see some touring cars up on 2 wheels. But I am sure you probably want to avoid doing that, especially as you run onto a long start-finish straight there, where obviously the diff might have a very slight moment of panic, or you might be struggling for traction if the car's up on 2 wheels in general, funnily enough. If the contact patch isn't quite there, you might scrub off some speed. And that certainly looks like that could have been the case, because that 1.2 second gap that Daly was enjoying earlier on now stands at just over half a second. That gap has closed right up in this race. 7 minutes left on the clock, and it's certainly not over yet. 0.4 of a second separate P1 and P2 in this one, and these two have cleared the rest of the pack, it must be said. Alan Matthews having at the moment what is a quiet and comfortable P3, but I suspect Andy Webb is on a bit of a charge at the moment. He is. Best lap 1 minute 54. Alan Matthews, best lap 1 minute 55. Last lap for Alan Matthews, 1 minute 56. Last lap for Andy Webb, 1 minute 55. So as it stands, Webb is closing down on Alan Matthews. He goes up onto 3 wheels there, spectacular visuals. But it could be the case that Andy Webb closes down on Alan Matthews and is able to fight for this podium. One of his first podiums, obviously, in the AROC Racing Leagues. That would be an impressive feat if he can pull it off here at Snetterton, especially against the likes of an experienced and skilled driver in the shape of Andrew Whitehead. Now, it looks like Steve Knight's had some issues out on track. Hopefully he can get back on the way, rejoin safely. It looks like he can. And I'm just trying to have a look at where... So he's actually only a couple of corners ahead of Jack Hodson at the moment. So, based on how the end of this race goes, we could be potentially on for Jack Hodson finding a way past Steve Knight and actually still being in with a shout of that reverse grid race pole, which would be an ideal weekend if you are Jack Hodson, because it will be a P7, which is still a good couple of points, and then fighting, or at least having a fighting chance of the top end of the order in race 2. We head back, speaking of the top end of the order though, to what's going on at the front, where we see Matt Daly leading from Andrew Whitehead. just a few minutes to go in this race, and I want to have a quick look at how the championship is shaping up. Let's then dive into some numbers. At the moment, Colin Keefe not present this evening, leading the charge in our touring car running, which does mean that Matt Daly will be rocketing ahead of Keefe in terms of the standings and will be taking charge of things. As I mentioned earlier on, we're at that phase of the championship now where every race matters just that little bit more. There's only a few races left to go after this one. There'll be 10 or so races to go in this championship, 250 points there or thereabouts on offer. And yeah, that just means that, I mean, that's to say, if you were to win every single one as well, we know how tricky that can be, 50 points per race weekend. And yes, as it stands, Matt Daly will be leapfrogging ahead already, even with just the results of race 1. After that, race 2 after that, and all of a sudden, you're going to be watching out for Andrew Whitehead if you are Colin Keefe as well, because Whitehead will be getting closer, and all of a sudden, this two-way battle for the championship has been pretty much ignited with Whitehead being brought back into that mix. It will be very interesting between our top 3 after this round here at Snetterton, as I say. Only a couple to go after this one, and this is it, I believe, for our 2025 running. Indeed, it is not. This is it for our 2025 running. We'll have it on the 30th of December. We'll be back out at Brand, so look forward to that one. But that will certainly be our last bit of 2025 running, unless we fancy doing something on a Thursday if, you know, no one else is busy celebrating New Year, etc. But yeah, going to be very interesting at the top end of the pack in this one. Then we have Whitehead, 173 points, as I mentioned, will be closing up and in the mix in the top step. Now, Greg Young not present this evening either, 131 points to his name, which means the likes of Miles Davis will be jumping up in the standings and will be closing up in the likes of Greg Young, which ignites the upper midfield battle, which involves John Cole and Alan Matthews as well. As it stands, Alan Matthews will overtake John Cole for P6 in the championship. Nathan Birch is a pretty lonesome P8 in the standings, 95 points, not necessarily that close to anyone above him, but also quite a ways ahead of those below him, and as I say, not present this evening either, unfortunately. Then we have Andy Webb in 10th in the championship with 48 points to his name. This will be a really good race weekend for his overall standing, so we'll see what he can do from this one. Then we have Jack Hodson, Paul Milman, Mike Hilton, Andy Craig, Guy Swarbrick, Steve Knight and Alex Smith completing the standing order from this championship show so far. As I go, Sean Connery once again, but I will remind you, of course, these standings do change after race 1. We'll give you a live update as they stand as we head into race 2, our reverse grid race after this one. Let's have one quick go through the order then. Well, Jack Colton has had to dive into the pits, unfortunately, so won't be fighting for that top step, or at least that front row of the grid for our reverse grid action. It's Steve Knight in P7. Then we have Paul Milman running in P6, heading through Riches at the moment. We have Miles Davis involved in that action earlier on, running along in P5. Then we have Andy Webb, had a brief glimpse of looking like he could fight for a podium, but is settling for P4. Still some decent points on offer for that one. Then we have Alan Matthews running along in P3, so we'll be rounding out that podium as it stands, unless anything happens in the final couple of laps. Then we have our battling duo at the front end of the order, Matt Daly and Andrew Whitehead, heading through Brundle and Nelson at the moment, are looking pretty comfortable in the race leader, pretty clear of the rest of the pack. Now, we do have 20 seconds left on the clock, in fact 21 seconds, right at the time I said 1 minute 34. It's going to be very cut and dry, folks, so whether or not we get a penultimate lap coming up next, or whether this is the penultimate lap, I think we are going to be getting a penultimate lap after this one. Yes, that looks like that will be the case, so we now start what will be the penultimate lap of this race. Matt Daly leads us onto this second to last lap. And in fact, while we do jump on board for this penultimate lap, before we head in for what will be the final go here at Snetterton, why don't we take a look at exactly how it looks from inside the cockpit of Matt Daly. I'm sure the drivers hate me doing this because I'm revealing all their secrets, but here we can see, if it's any consolation, Matt, it's while you're on worn tyres. So hopefully that will mask some of the immense skill that Matt Daly, I'm sure, keeps close to his chest. I know he doesn't. He's very generous with his time, skills and advice to the rest of the drivers, and is still on for a 1 minute 55 second region lap time, so still a very respectable time indeed. Here's how it looks though, if you're on board with Matt Daly. Heads round towards Williams in just a moment. See him fighting ever so slightly with the front axle there as he tries to get the car to respond into Williams. These front tyres not quite as grippy as they once were at the start of this race. We head onto Williams rather now, 120 miles an hour. Let's see what speed we achieve before you have to dab onto the brakes. Under the bridge we go, and it's around about 130 or so before you brake before Brundle. So apologies if I said brake after Brundle. That's some of my old single-seater thinking heading into the broadcast there. But Daly leads us round Coram now. Plenty of speed carried around this right hand. It's one of those tricky right-handers which changes in its radius ever so slightly and makes it just a little bit more difficult to judge what type of line you want to take through it. But Daly certainly done a very good job of that this evening. The next couple of seconds he will be crossing the line to start what will be the final lap in this race now. Let's jump on board with him then as he celebrates one final tour. And there we see Daly heading on to Williams for one last time in race one. Whitehead staying around about 1 second behind him at the moment. Hasn't been able to close up, but when all is said and done, to be only a second apart after 25 minutes worth of running, a really commendable, that's the word I was looking for, not dependable, really commendable job from Andrew Whitehead in this one. I certainly couldn't have managed to keep up with Matt Daly, or at least to supersede Matt Daly earlier on for 25 minutes in race conditions. A really respectable job from Whitehead, and will be rewarded with at least a P2, as I say. He closes up to Kneath in the standings. And things look very interesting in the championship, but things are certainly going to look very interesting if you are Matt Daly now, as he heads on to the start-finish straight. Less than a second separate him in P1, P2, but that's not going to matter because Daly takes race victory here in race one at Snetterton. Fantastic race victory. He'll be very happy with that one as he performs a beautiful handbrake turn across the line there. Lovely stuff from Daly. Whitehead comes home P2, and then we see Alan Matthews jumping onto the start-finish straight as he rounds out the podium. Congratulations, Alan. A nice P3 there to add to the points tally. Then we have Andy Webb coming home in P4. Again, another driver who will be benefiting pretty bigly in terms of the championship standings. Then we have Miles Davis bringing it home to round out the top 5. Paul Millman currently under a bit of pressure from Steve Knight, who is a bit of lap traffic. He's more than entitled to unlap himself if conditions are right and it is safe to do so, and he's not going to be impeding that driver on the lead lap. If he's quicker, he's got the quicker car, by all means he has the right to unlap himself. But he heads around Murray's for one last time at this race evening. He's not going to be able to unlap himself, but he does do a very good job of getting close to doing so. Big Paul Millman, who completes the lead lap running in P6, and then we have Steve Knight completing it in P7 as well. That brings an end then to the action here in race one. We'll catch you in just a few minutes as we get ready for our reverse grid here at Snetterton. Well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies, the camera is really misbehaving at the moment, but here's our grid ready for the start of our reverse grid race 2. It's Steve Knight and Paul Milner on row 1. Then we have Miles Davis, Andy Webb completing the second row, followed by Alan Matthews, Andrew Whitehead in row 3, and Matt Daly and Jack Hodson completing the fourth row of the grid. So Hodson appears to have a good sparring partner at the back end of the pack, but it's here at the front end where all the action could be as the revs rise. We do have 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away for 25 more minutes of racing here at Snetterton. It's a good start for Steve Knight there, who gets a nose out in front of Paul Millman. Could be in a very good position here to benefit from an overtake here, but actually it's going to be Steve Knight who filters on through down the inside, keeps that P1 position. Watch out for Andy Webb, who's now side by side with Steve Knight, has the inside here for Montreal. Up into P2 goes Andy Webb and nearly takes the race lead, sees a gap opening up for him. It was a slightly iffy run for Paul Millman, but he continues on in P2. Alan Matthews runs along in P5. Daly's up into 4th already. Really good progression through the field from the back end of the pack. Hodson remains in P6. Miles Davis is in P7. Not sure what happened to Steve Knight there, but he tumbles back down the order on the run into Montreal and ends up in 8th position. Andy Webb takes the race lead. We head into Agostini and is looking very comfortable indeed. Half a second is the gap between himself and Paul Millman at this point. He's going to hope that Paul Millman has his best interest at heart and can use Millman as a defensive barrier, because the 2 drivers behind Paul Millman are indeed Matt Daly and Andrew Whitehead, already in this race. A few corners in, they've filtered their way up through the back of the pack and already fighting for P2. One of them is already on the spot on the podium. This is a great drive from our 2 protagonists in the first race. They are side by side with Paul Millman. Paul Millman is swarmed. Where does Millman go? There's a little bit of elbows out action. Millman very considerately backing out of that one. That could have been an airplane crash otherwise. He does continue on. There's contact between Daly and Whitehead. Daly losing out as a result of that, heads through Nelson and loses multiple positions whilst doing so. So that is a bit of a chink in the armour there for Matt Daly. He tumbles back down to 5th position. It looks just a little bit better for Andrew Whitehead, it must be said. Millman continues on in 3rd, then Alan Matthews is up into 4th, and all of a sudden, with the likes of Matthews ahead of him, the cars that Matt Daly now needs to overtake are perhaps just a little bit more challenging to find a way past than what they would have been right on lap 1. Lap 1, really, we should have been very happy with that one. It couldn't have gone much better right up until that run through Nelson, where it all went a little bit wrong. The back end kicks out for Daly there. He goes late on the brakes and very nearly finds himself into the scenery. Davis nearly replicates that as well. The other yellow Giulietta with D and A for the initials on the timing system nearly finds himself also having his own issues with some scenery here in Norfolk, but is able to continue on. Daly up into 4th position, then watch out for Paul Millman, who's having a look down the inside. Nothing that he can do from there though. And we see Andy Webb continuing on in the lead of this race. 3 seconds is the gap between himself and Whitehead, although Whitehead is now clear of Alan Matthews and should be able to close up on Andy Webb. But it must be said, Andy's flying along at the moment. Some really strong pace from him so far. Might be controlling this race quite nicely. This could be exactly what he needs to get a race victory under his belt here in the Giuliettas. Looking further back down the order though, we see a 3-car battle brewing up as he run through Williams. Hodson loses out this time out though. It's going to be Davis versus Paul Millman. Millman, no, that's starting on the front row of the grid in this one. A couple of laps later, we see him squabbling for P5 on the defence then, as Davis has a look to see where he can go. He's going to try and hang it around the outside. That will give him the inside for the right-hander of Nelson coming up in just a moment, but it gets a little bit too close for comfort. The back end squirms around, as I suspect there was a tiny amount of contact. If not, that was just some very bold braking, which didn't quite work out for Davis, unfortunately. Millman remains in P5. Hodson stays in P6, or in fact makes his way up into P6, and is now under pressure from Miles Davis. Just ahead then, it's going to be Daly, it's going to be Matthews as well, as we see Jack Hodson spinning out at Murray's. Just in the background there, a disaster for Jack Hodson. A race where potentially, with a bit of practice under his belt, potentially a shout at a reverse grid pole start here. It's all gone a little bit wrong. Actually, I think that might have been a glitch on our end. That might have just been a bit of a weird lag error, because they seem to be continuing on absolutely fine in some decent positions still. So not sure what's gone on there. Either way, plenty of action going on throughout the pack. This could well be my end. Apologies if there's any issues on the streams. Folks, as I say, do make sure to get any comments, queries, or conundrums that you may have into the comments. Keep those in the oh dear, that's a big off for Miles Davis, heading through Palmer there. Just takes too much of the track, goes up and into the grass. Disaster for Miles Davis there. He is able to get back on the way, but has lost plenty of time. Is now plumb last in this race. A disaster for Miles Davis, which, you know, it's been a little bit palindromic, his time out at Snetterton. Didn't start out the best in the GTA. Nice recovery. Pretty decent race in race 1 here, this time the Juliettas, and unfortunately he will be clawing his way back up from last position with 20 minutes to go in this race. Not ideal for Miles Davis. We head back to the top end of the pack though, where Andy Webb is still controlling things really nicely here. Not to put any pressure on Andy Webb, not to give him the commentator's curse, but it's looking good, it must be said. 1 minute 54s from Andy Webb. He is matching and in fact exceeding the likes of Matt Daly and Alan Matthews in terms of pace. Alan Matthews is kind of Andy Webb's best friend in this race. Daly is too preoccupied with Alan Matthews. Those two are slowing each other down in the midst of battle, which means that Andy Webb only has to worry about Andrew Whitehead. I say only, it is Andrew Whitehead. He's flying along and is currently doing very well in the championship. Again, we'll look at that in just a moment. But yes, effectively, it's just going to be a 2-horse race for the race lead for the time being. No, I hate to add, because of course, who knows what Matt Daly can do later on into the action. But as it stands, Andy Webb looking pretty comfortable here. Whitehead is closing up. That is one thing we do have to bear in mind. Best laps overall for these drivers, 0.3 of a second apart. Andrew Whitehead 1 minute 54.4. Andy Webb 1 minute 54.7. On that last lap, it was a 55.1 and a 54.4 for Webb and then Whitehead respectively. So Whitehead's definitely on a nice run here at the moment and closing up on our race leader. We will tune into that in just a moment. There's plenty of action and quarrelling going on elsewhere in the pack though, and it's between Matthews and Daly just behind them, just a corner or so behind our two race leaders. We see that they are elbows out battling, making contact here or there as well as they continue on down through Agostini themselves. In fact, no, they're not. They're heading through Williams already. They're absolutely flying by. I can't even keep up with them where they are on track. Either way, they are now very much enjoying their battle as they head through Williams and on to the Bentley Straight. We can see that Daly is attached to the rear bumper of Matthews' Giulietta just in front. Benefits from a bit of a tow. We know that Giulietta of Daly's got some decent straight line speed. Can he hang it around the outside as he did on Whitehead 1 race ago? I think he can. What a move from Matt Daly there. Heads into Nelson ahead of this 2-car battle for the podium. It's Daly up into P3. I suspect, though, Matthews isn't going to give that one up quite so easily. We could see battling continuing on as we head further into this race. Here we go then, around that final corner, onto the start-finish straight once more, and we can see Daly ahead of Matthews. Is that a flash of the headlights from Alan Matthews? I think it is. Either way, he's either just knocked it on or has decided to give a quick flash. The headlights have remained on, so I suspect it's probably the former. Might even be a glitch of the Assetto Corsa, but either way, down the inside from Montreal, from pretty much nowhere seemingly, it is going to be Andrew Whitehead taking the race lead in this one. Andy Webb settling for P2 for the time being. The gap opened up for him. He saw an opportunity. Whitehead goes for it, and it's race lead for Andrew Whitehead.
And we have now crossed the halfway marker in this race as it stands. Whitehead controlling things quite nicely. 3 seconds is the gap between himself and Webb. Webb holding on to P2 at the moment, but it must be said, Daly very much hunting him down. On the last lap, Matt and Daly, 1 minute 54.2, Andy Webb 55. Best lap overall for Daly, a 1 minute 53.9. Really nice lap there from Matt Daly in this race so far. I'm sure we might even see a better one over the next couple of minutes. Then we have Alan Matthews running along in P4. A nice comfortable margin ahead of the likes of Paul Mullen. Holding on to P5, nice top 5 result here from this reverse grid race on the cards potentially. Then we have Jack Hodson having some earlier issues in this race. Let's not forget what happened at, well, possibly happened at Murray's, not too sure. Don't really know if it happened or not. Either way, it's closing up on Paul Millman and could be on for a top 5 finish here himself. Miles Davis had some issues earlier on, hasn't been able to recover from them too much, but is still only a few seconds up down the road from the likes of Hodson and Millman. So you never know, anything could happen. And then we have Steve Knight rounding out the order. But back to the top end of the pack then. And as I say, we've crossed half race distance in this one, so now will be a good opportunity to potentially look at how the standings are shaping up after the end of race 1. Well, as it stands, unsurprisingly, Matt Daly now takes the championship lead in this one. Colin Keefe not present this evening, unfortunately. And as I say, Daly has leapfrogged him in the standings, 249 points to Keefe's 241 now. As he's really closing down on Webb is Matt Daly. We'll stay on board with him. Then we have Andrew Whitehead running along in P3. Is closed up to Colin Keefe. Is now within a race weekend's worth of points. And by that I mean, if Whitehead were to say the next round Keefe isn't present and Whitehead was to take double race victory, well, Whitehead would overtake Keefe as it stands. So Whitehead might be, as I say, still very much in this one. It all comes down to, I think, attendance over the next few rounds and also pace. Yeah, we'll be in for a great fight in this championship, as we're in for a great fight on track at the moment. Down the Bentley straight we go. Daly side by side with Webb. Has a look down the inside this time around, which is a little bit different to what we've seen from Daly over the past few overtaking attempts here. Usually we see him hang it round the outside of Brundle. Gives him the inside to Nelson. This time out, though, it's from a little bit further back, so he had the inside for Brundle. The car was enough ahead to where he was confident that he could just clip the inside through Nelson as well. So that means Daly's up into P2 and is now released to try and hunt down Andrew Whitehead. It's a 3/10. They're similar on that previous lap, but they're the same in terms of pace. But in terms of their best laps overall, Daly is around about 2 or 3/10 of a second faster. So well, we've got around about 5 laps and 4 seconds. Maths say that is no longer possible, but who knows? Anything could happen in this one, and I'm sure, as we've seen in the past, you guys will know that as well. Andy Webb then still on for a very good P3 as it stands, and he should be pretty comfortable in this P3 for the time being. It'll be a nice podium to add to his budding AROC Racing League's career. And speaking of AROC Racing League's career, Greg Young has had a decently long one. Isn't here this evening, but is still 4th in the standings, 131 points, just ahead of Alan Matthews, who is closing up and as it stands will overtake Greg Young in the standings at the end of this race 2 here this evening to take P4. It's currently P5 though, 126 points for his name. Then we have Miles Davis, another budding driver in the racing leagues, 122 points to his name, running in P6 at the moment. Davis currently P7 in this race, so we'll take away a few points and we'll get close to the likes of Matthews, but obviously Matthews will leapfrog ahead, so Davis will stay where he is in terms of standings overall, but we'll get close to Greg Young. Again, no change for John Cole or Nathan Birch. Andy Webb, though, with a potential, or as it stands, likely podium on the card. Let's not forget he's within 6 seconds of the race lead. He'll have a really good day out here at Snetterton. He's closing up on the likes of Nathan Birch. He's closing up on the likes of John Cole. He won't be able to usurp Nathan Birch. He's too many points away. He's 35 points apart. But if he keeps getting these results in and other drivers aren't maybe necessarily able to participate in the final part of this season, we will be seeing the likes of Andy Webb leapfrogging up from like 11th, 9th, 10th to around about P5, P6 in the standings. It would be a really good showing for Andy Webb on his debut season. Meanwhile, though, between two drivers who are very much not having the debut, it's Jack Hodson versus Paul Millman. Hodson goes around the outside at Brundle. Nice move there, but Millman's going to try and claw it back. Has a good run down towards Coram and is still hanging to the inside here, which means that Hodson has to keep one eye on his rearview mirrors. Cannot rest easy, cannot just take the line that he wants to, because he's not sure where that pink
blue and white Giulietta is going to be positioned. He is now confident in that, and he's now taken P5. Just behind them, though, is Miles Davis. All this battling has slowed these two drivers down, has brought Miles Davis back into the fight here, and he could be on for a good one still. As it stands, and having another look at that championship, Andy Webb, P9, as we mentioned. Will Inglis is P5, no change there. Hodgson will gain a couple more points from this one and get closer to Will Inglis in 10th, and Paul Millman will be getting close to Hodgson as well. They're only 3 points separated in the championship and a few hundreds separated on track at the moment, so this is a battle that really does matter for the championship standings. Then we have Mike Hilton P13, Steve Knight P14 ahead of Andy Craig, Guy Swarbrick and Alex Smith, completing the championship standings in this one. Just under 7 minutes to go then in this race, and this is the closest bit of action out on track. It's Jack Hodgson fighting for P5. He's looking pretty comfortable at the moment, as now the battle shifts more towards this scrap for P6. Millman versus Davis as they head through Agostini. What can Davis do? Davis has some immense pace, we do know that, but Millman has experience to his favour. Best lap for Millman so far, 57. Best lap for Miles at 55. It's a pretty clear advantage to Millman, though, to Davis there, sorry, as Millman looks to be struggling with his tyres, goes a little bit deep into the run down towards Williams, keeps that outside line there, which opens up the inside for Miles Davis. It's Millman down into 7th, Davis up into 6th. And now we're going to get an interesting battle on our hands, I think, folks, for the top 5 position of P5, as Hodgson's running along in P5, Miles Davis not too far behind at all, although it must be said, Millman's doing his best job to keep up, but is certainly still in the mix here. Goes up onto 2 wheels, so that will cost him some time. We see a poor run for Miles Davis there, means that he tumbles back down from 6th and into 7th as well. That is not ideal for Miles Davis. Not too much longer left in this one to scrap it out for that top 5 finish. We head through Riches once more. This looks a little bit more comfortable if you are Jack Hodgson at this point. Millman is now once again on the defence with a P6 at the moment. Millman seems to be getting into a bit of a rhythm this race weekend. We saw him earlier on, didn't quite look too comfortable, but now seems to be scrapping with his fellow competitors. We see just ahead, I mean, as we can see coming into shot, is the race leaders heading through Williams and onto the start-finish straight. Andrew Whitehead leads this one ahead of Matt Daly. Andy Webb running along in P3, and as I say, that podium looks pretty secure at this point. But P5 certainly isn't secure, nor is P6. We run through Agostini yet again. We see that it's going to be Millman with the outside line there. Davis having a look around the inside, although they swap positions before we head through Hamilton. And Millman now on the defence of P6. This gives Jack Hodgson a bit of breathing space before we head down the long straight at Williams once more. Right-hander coming up next through Williams. We go on to that Bentley straight, and Paul Millman, look at how little grip he's got there. He was full axle rotation there, full steering lock. Nothing the car was responding with as well. It was just ploughing on forward. Millman down into 7th, Davis into 6th. There was contact between the two, a decent lick of pace, it must be said, but no balance affected. They don't have any ill effects. Maybe a tiny bit of damage to the car at this point, but I don't think that particularly matters. I don't think Paul Millman's got any grip to miss at this point. So Paul Millman continues on in P7. Unfortunately, the tyres look like they have just sort of completely dropped off, really, for Paul Millman. Davis continues on in P6, and Hodgson is in P5 for the time being, but we'll get over the next lap, I think, a more representative idea of what their pace is looking like and how we can compare these two drivers, if we can get a representative time, because they might already be battling. We head on to that start-finish straight, and it must be said Davis is closing up, benefits from a bit of a tow, bit of a slipstream as we head down towards the first corner. Here we see Davis having a look around the outside, heading into Agostini, that run into the left-handed hairpin, which does open up a little bit down towards Hamilton. Some fabulous corners here at Snetterton, as I alluded to earlier on. And so many corners where you expect, you know, a certain layout. You've got that long sweeping right-hander, you've got a hairpin in the form of Agostini pretty much, but they're a little bit different to your traditional corners, and it means it just adds that extra element of surprise and intrigue and challenge for the drivers. We head through Williams onto that Bentley straight yet again. Davis is sticking to the rear wing toe of Jack Hodson. He's going to have a look around the outside. It is Davis reminiscent, very reminiscent in fact, of another yellow Giulietta in this race weekend's running so far. Doesn't quite go the same way though, clips the grass. Davis is up onto two wheels. He's somehow still pointing in the right direction in this corner complex. Continues on in P6, but just a little bit further back this time around. I am going to keep one eye where our race leaders are. They're 22 seconds into the lap, just as we had in race one. It's going to be very close indeed as to whether or not we have actually started the penultimate lap or not. I think we could well have started the penultimate lap in this one, but only by a couple of seconds or so. We'll catch up with that in just a moment. Did see Paul Millman's in P6. Hodson has tumbled down towards P7, so a poor run at the end of the lap for Jack Hodson there. Effectively relinquishes P5 after a good few laps worth of battling, which is a shame, but that now promotes Miles Davis up into that top 5 position, and Paul Millman continues on in P6, so a good few points to be taken away from that one. Now, here we go, folks. Just when you thought the battling might be coming to an end because the race is drawing to a close, I've got brilliant news for you. We head down the Bentley Straight, and here we see Matt Daly and Andrew Whitehead now pretty much occupying each other's personal space. We head down the Bentley Straight. It's left-hander Budle coming up in just a moment, and Daly benefits through that slipstream. It's going to be down to the final lap, folks. Isn't that what you want to see? It's going to be a battle for the race lead on the last lap of this race. We head down through Nelson into Coram in just a moment. 0.3 of a second is the gap between Whitehead and Daly. Here's the stats for you in just a moment. Although the gap opens up down the inside, can he get it done through Coram before we even start that final lap? Into Murray's we go. A tricky corner to get right at the best of times. Nevertheless, when you've got Matt Daly putting pressure on you as well, we head on to that start-finish straight. 0.3 of a second is the gap. The timer hits 0. The next lap is going to be the final lap of this race. Here we go, folks. It's a last lap battle for the race lead. Down the inside then looks Matt Daly into Richards, kissing that apex, but nowhere he can go because it's well defended by Whitehead, who hangs it round the outside, keeps that momentum up, keeps the car out in front most importantly. Into Montreal we head. The tight right-hander, sausage curve that you don't want to go anywhere near, an exit to the corner you don't want to go anywhere near. Ask some of our race leaders from the GTA 1750 running at the start of race one last week out as well. We head through Palmer. No change of position just yet, but there's so little time separating them. As I say, here's the stats and figures, folks. Best lap overall for Daly, 53.9. Whitehead, 54.2. Last lap was a 55.1 for Whitehead, a 54.2 for Matt Daly. Matt Daly has the upper hand in terms of pace in this late phase in this race. The question is, as we all know, as much more skilled commentators than myself have alluded to in the past, it's one thing to catch up, it's another thing to find a way past. You need that extra time delta, that extra advantage to get past once you have closed up. Can Daly do it? It's a question we've asked many times. We head on to the Bentley Straight once more, and Daly's only 0.2 of a second apart. He closes up, he's positioning himself on the outside, but it's already defended by Whitehead. Look at the pace delta though. Down the inside goes Matt Daly, potentially hanging it around the outside on the defence, so Whitehead shows true bravery. We head through Nelson. He's still in the race lead, is Whitehead. This is going to be so tooth and nail, folks. It's going to be so close to the edge. Here we can see Daly has the inside through Coram. This could be the deciding overtake. Daly takes the race lead in the penultimate corner on the final lap. What can Andrew Whitehead do in response? Is there anything left for him to do? There is not, folks. On the second to last corner of the last lap, Matt Daly makes it a double victory. Not an easy fight though. In the end, it's the Carinello who takes the race 2 victory. Congratulations, Matt Daly. Well for Andrew Whitehead as well. Half a second was the gap in the end. What a close one. I am very much on edge after that one. Andy Webb rounds out your podium then. A very early podium in his AROC Racing League's career. Hope you enjoy that one, Andy. I'm sure there's many more to come. Alan Matthews then brings it home in P4 in just a moment. Some decent points to be brought away from that one. But what a fight that we enjoyed on that last lap, folks. Wasn't it some thrilling stuff? These two drivers know how to put on a show for us. They just had to make it wait until that last lap. What is Whitehead doing?
Now, this is a bit naughty, Andrew. I don't know if you're supposed to be pointing in the wrong direction, or are we just going to get some donuts in celebration? Matthews has crossed line in P4. Davis completes your top 5 after a good few laps worth of battling there. Oh, I know what Whitehead's doing. We haven't had this for a while. I did mention it last week, I think. Yeah, here at Snetterton, you can take some interesting runs through the paddock. It's all got ground terrain effects. And for some reason, this map is all simulated, so you can just kind of do this. There's a big bridge there, which I think, yeah, I know exactly where Whitehead's going. Now, I was going to call it Victory Bridge because it was very close for Whitehead, but it just wasn't quite enough in the end. And Whitehead, I'm not too sure if at this point this Juliet has got an MOT on it anymore, but he's leaving the circuit, as used to be done of racing drivers back in the day. As I say, Whitehead might want to put an MOT on this one. The hazards are on, so we know they work. He started his MOT. But it's been a few years now since we've had these cars, and I don't think in that time they've had their slip updated. And, I mean, it looks in very good condition after that racing, and I'm sure my voice will be after a few moments of recovery as well. But Whitehead brings it back into the pits. Daly's enjoying some victory slides and celebrations. What a way to round out the running this evening. Thank you very much all for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed watching as much as I've enjoyed commentating. We'll catch you in a fortnight's time. Next time out, we bring these Juliettas. We'll be on 30th of December. We're here in a week, though, for Brands Hatch in our GCA 1750s. As we see Whitehead parking up his Julietta alongside myself. I don't know why I commentate from inside a car. It's not the most comfortable commentary rig, but it certainly works. Hope you've enjoyed watching as much as I've enjoyed commentating this evening. We'll catch you in a week's time, as I say, and a good night.